Okay, we will now inject our new entities class as a service. So first of all, open up the entities class that we got right here. And we don't need to have those lists here static anymore, because a service in ASP.NET Core is an instance of an object. So static is exactly the opposite, right? For static, you don't need an instance. But however, the dependency injection in ASP.NET Core is working with instances. So once the application is started, for example, there are a couple of different ways, but an instance of entities will get created, right, and shared across all controllers. For example, everyone who's referencing it at all. This is why our fields that we have right here, our lists, should not be static anymore, because we will use entities here as a service, which is an instance. So let's get rid of static. Don't need it anymore. This is the first step. Now that purple underline is coming because the application is running in the background, and it's telling me that I need to restart the application to let the changes take place. So once I shut down the application in the background, I just did that, it should take a second and everything should be working fine again. Great. Now you can see that he's complaining about random. That's because it has to be static. There you go. Now I totally forget that. Let's move on to our controllers now. So open up Flight Controller and Passenger Controller. Now both controllers, since you can see that they are complaining here because they're using entities, but entities no longer has static passengers, right? So we need an instance, and now it's the important point. The controllers will now take a private read-only entities object. And right now, to make things working, we will make it static, but just remove that in a second again when we come to that point. So static private read-only entities, let's call it entities, equals to new entities object. There we go. Let's copy that line of code here. You can see that we got that inside here. It will create a new entity, and for sure we're again able to use it, right? We will just add that dependency injection code in a second. We're just preparing stuff. However, the important thing to notice for you right now is that the passenger for sure needs access to our entities, and inside there is a list. So this is why we are creating here a static entities object, which will soon get replaced by an object or an instance from the dependency injection. We'll take care about it just in a second. Switch to the flight controller and exactly add the same stuff. So here we can go ahead and simply paste it in. We can also remove that random here. And also here we got that static private read-only entity. Awesome. So both controllers will create a new entity object. Important to know is that so far we haven't used the dependency injection at all. We're just creating a new static field of type entity so far. Awesome. So once we remove that static, we will also write that in lowercase. You can also go ahead and do it now. So write it now in lowercase if you like, instead of Pascal case, but that's up to you. However you define how you write a variable or field when it's static, right? Great. So now let me explain you what's our next step and how we can use dependency injection and what's happening in the background. All right. So you don't want to create a different instance of the entities class for each controller in the system. You want to store both passenger and flight states in a single database. Besides, you may need to change the constructor parameters of the entities class later on. There are also other reasons for not instantiating services in controllers, but they are outside from the scope of this course. So let's see how to inject the entities class into the application services as a singleton to share a single instance across all controllers. Inside of your project, open up program.cs. This is the file that you need to configure your ASP.NET Core application. Also, you can see that right here. Here you can create and add services to the container. So let's say you can add services to your application here. Just before you build that application, using builder.build, you are able to add the services directly here. So let's do that. Just before we build the application, we're going to go ahead and say builder.services.addSingleton. So one instance of the class gets shared between all controllers. That's what addSingleton is doing. And now we need our namespace. So let's go to the very top and add using flights.data. There we go. And now we go ahead to builder services addSingleton, and the type is entities. Right, so this will add a singleton of type entity, so just an instance of the entities class, to the dependency injection, let's call it ecosystem, right? So now we are able to grab the entity singleton inside of the controllers to use it instead of creating a new instance every time inside of a controller, right? That doesn't make sense, because just imagine that entities is just like your database, right? Just imagine it like that. So you don't want to have many databases, right? You want to have one database instead. So we create one instance of that database, let's call it like this, and it's getting shared between all the controllers. Great. So this is the first step. You register it into the ecosystem or DI system. Now, after registering it, we can now inject it. So let's switch over into the flight controller first of all. Now you register those services that you register in the program.cs directly, or you can inject them directly by using the constructor. So inside here we got that constructor in the flight controller, right? Flight controller. It's just taking here a logger instance. And we go ahead and extend that, and the only thing we have to do is really to go into the constructor, add a new parameter right here, so something that we receive here, and we receive a new, let me just make a line break, entities object. We can call it entities. And this object you provided will be the instance from the dependency injection that we have registered here as a singleton, right? So we take that instance, it's getting provided in the constructor. We can now take it here from the parameter and assign this value, right? That one is coming from the DI. We can assign it to the entities field right here. So we go ahead and say entities is equals to entities. So in order to make that working, we for sure go ahead and remove that static now. Awesome. Private, read-only static. Now, since it's private and read-only, it should be lowercase now. So go ahead, right-click, and call it entities. You can see that we have a conflict here, right? So it's exactly the same name, this entities. It's for sure referencing that one, assigned to the value from the dependency injection from the constructor here, entities. And this is why you often see that private read-only fields, right, referencing that one, written in lowercase, like entities, for example. So you can make a difference. That one is inside of the class, and that one got provided from the dependency injection. That makes this keyword here completely useless. You can see that the logger here is doing that too, right? So awesome. Let's stick with that naming convention. And the great thing about is, since we renamed it, it's everywhere referenced exactly like this. So entities with an underscore, and then flights. So everything is working fine inside here. Awesome. So copy it, go to the passenger controller, paste it, or just replace the line of code. So we again remove static and just make it in lowercase with an underscore. Exactly the same thing as in the flight controller. But here we don't have a constructor. So let's go ahead and create one. Write down ctor, press tab, which will just fold out a constructor for you. Let's go ahead, we take entities from the dependency injection, that's the instance, and assign it. So let's say the field entities with an underscore is the value of the entities object provided from DI. Awesome. Now let's take that entities here and replace the entities class here with that instance in our controller. Awesome. So definitely don't forget that inside of the passengers, now make use of the entities field with that underscore, because that's the value from the dependency injection. If you are not confident right now, go ahead and take a look at the GitHub repository to check if everything is right for you. Great. So one more thing we need to remove at both controllers is that we don't need to create an instance anymore, right? So we have new, but in the moment where the passenger controller would get created, we automatically provide the entities instance from the dependency injection. So instead of creating a new one here, we can simply get rid of it, because it will, however, after initialization or during initialization, will take the value from the constructor. Awesome. So in both controllers, remove the new entities instantiation here. Great. So the value from entities will only come now from the constructor. Great. So again, start the application and check if everything is still running. So I already registered. Let's search for a flight. Let's click on book. Let's book one seat, and it still works. That's awesome. Take a look at the console. You will see that we were able to log in after registration and then booking a flight. Perfect. So definitely don't forget, every time you make changes to your application, which could impact, well, the functionality, go ahead and check afterwards if everything is still working fine. Awesome. So we assigned the responsibility of creation of the entities class to .NET Dependency Injections library. We added the entities class to the service collection as a singleton, so that every time any controller wants to be instantiated, the same instance is passed to its constructor as a parameter. Now the last thing for today which we will implement is automatically seeding, and you will also want to have that for some other applications later on. For example, if you build an application, you got an admin user, you want to always have that admin user once you switch your environment, for example. So there is some pre-seeding of data, for example, an admin account or manager account, or some sort of other information, location information, or some products who should always be inside of a database, right? So this is called data seeding. You just seed or add information into a database by code. So this is seeding. Go ahead and open up the entities class. Let me just show you where we have that seeding right now. We have sort of fake seeding right here in that flights list, because here we have some predefined data. However, this is not how it should be really implemented if you want to seed data. Let's take a look now on how you can seed data the correct way. First of all, let's change that flight array here to be type of list. So instead having flight array, let's create a list of type flight, new flight. There you go, new list of type flight. Great. Now let's open up program.cs. And now after building, very important, so we add a service before we build, then we build, and now we can create an instance from it. So we can go directly after building, but it's really important that it's after building, as we will not be able to now create the scope of our entity service. And that's important, so every time later on you will have to, well, make use of a service inside program.cs. Remember this video or just come back and watch it again. So we now inside of program.ts want to use our service that we have just set up here. Then the app got created, and now we can use that service. Var entities equals to app.services.create scope, that's important, .service provider, that's inside of the scope. And now we can get a service of type entities here, and that one is exactly the service that we are creating here from the singleton call. Great, so now we have that service. Okay, let's switch back to our entities and copy everything what's inside here of that curly braces. So copy all the new elements here. As I said, inside of the curly braces, copy it. Then let me just remove it so that we in the end just have a new empty list. So new list of type flight, which is empty. Let me get rid of that. Here, we can also remove the random now since we don't use it anymore. So as you can see, a lot of refactoring, right? So inside of entities, we only have passenger list and new flight list. However, it doesn't really make a difference if you use that I list or simple list. So go ahead with the data type you like or keep it as it is right now. Let's switch over to program.cs again. Keep in mind that I copied all the flight information. So let's create a new random now. Var random equals to new random. Because we need it for our flights. Let's create a new array of type flights. So flights, we need our namespace for this using flights.domain.entities. There we go. Now we can use our flights entity or flight entity. Scroll down again. Let's say array, so flight array. Let's call it flights equals to new flight array. Add that curly braces, paste in all the copied information about all the flights, like this. Awesome. Let me collapse that. So we now have a flight array. Here are our preceding data. Let me rename that. Let's call it flights to seed, for example, just to make that naming clear. So those are the information or data that we want to seed. Now let's add it. Use the service entities dot flights. So we're using that one here, right? Flights.add range. Now we take the service and add into the flights of that service the flights to seed. That's everything we have to do. And now we have that one instance of our entities class, which is just like our database, And on startup, right, this is program.cs. So this will get executed one time at startup, and then we'll go ahead and add our flights to seat into the entities instance, so into the service. Awesome, and once you start the application, you will see that we will still have all our predefined flights now provided. As you can see, once I click on search flights, we will still have all the information, but now it got seeded from program.cs into the service that we have just created. And why did we do all of that? So right now we haven't really achieved anything new, right? But we made a huge step forward of using dependency injection, because we will now switch over in the next step to use Entity Framework Core, and then it's just one more final step to really make use of an SQL database, which will be well directly the same, right? Because Entity Framework can directly be used to run commands on an SQL database, so this is just some configuration. However, as I earlier said, we are really going a linear learning path, so you will learn everything from scratch, and when I say scratch, I really mean from scratch. So absolutely bare bones. When you start with a variable, you turn that into a static list, then you break it down into entities and all of this, bring it inside a different layer, and again, then inside of dependency injection, remove it from being static again, and then finally make use of it in Entity Framework Core. So step by step. However, as I already said, later on, you definitely want to go ahead and directly start by creating a service, adding it to the dependency injection, and use Entity Framework directly. Okay, so next up, we got Entity Framework Core. Welcome to day 15 of our challenge. Yesterday we have added some domain logic, and today we will be taking a look on how we can move our static lists, which are containing our data, to a new class which we call Entity, which we will then afterwards use to implement Entity Framework Core. So far we've been recklessly storing data in the controllers as static fields to focus on front-end design. But you don't want to store data in controllers, right? In real-world applications, we usually store data in real databases. We are going to move the data from controllers to a new class, which we will now call entities. And later on, we will use Entity Framework to connect to a database. Entity Framework is a .NET library that helps developers to store and retrieve data from various database technologies, such as SQL, for example. Great, so now let's switch over to our project, create a new folder and a new class called Entities, and let's place our lists inside there instead. As discussed in the last video, controllers are not a suitable place for application state persistence. So let's go ahead and create a new C# class inside of a new folder. Go into your project, right click and add a new folder to your project and call that folder data. So this is also a usual habit that you will see in web development, to name a folder which cares about persistent storage data. In that data folder, right click again, go ahead and add a new class. We will call this class, we'll take a simple C# class right here, and we'll call it entities. Awesome. Now we need to get our lists, which we are now using for storage inside of the application, inside of our controllers, here into that entity class. So go ahead and open up the controller, passenger controller. Inside there, we got that static private list passengers, right? So simply take it, right click, and then just cut it out, save it, move to entities, and paste it right into the class. Now for sure we need to be able to access it. So instead of making it private, we will instead make it public so that we can access it from outside of this class. Now he also doesn't know type passenger, not a problem at all. Hold the cursor above it or press Ctrl dot and then show potential fixes and implement the using flight domain entities namespace right here. Now switch back to our passenger controller after saving. You can see that we have some errors here. Let's go ahead and import a new namespace using flights.data. Great, so now let's scroll down, and everywhere we got that passengers, we simply, before that, we're gonna call entities class, right? And since entities here is our new class and it got that static list, we can for sure access it without creating an instance. So entities passengers add. We for sure do that everywhere here, everywhere where it's referenced at all. Awesome. Okay, now we call the entities class and inside there the list to add, find, and so on. Now let's switch to our flight controller. Here we got the same thing going on with that static private list flights. So let me just collapse that. Here we got it now with all of the content. I'll copy it, or however, we can also go ahead and cut it. So not a problem at all, right click, cut, it's easier, visible for you, save it like this, go to entities, and for sure again, paste it inside here with all of the content. I will again collapse it, and you can see that we need random for sure. So let's create a static random, static random, random equals to new random. So now we can use a random again inside here, right? Because for our flight data, we need some random elements. And again, we need to be able to access this flights. So let's go ahead and change the access modifier, static public list. Great. Okay, now let's rename that flights here, right? Because here we got passengers in uppercase. So let's go ahead and do that. Flights, right click, rename flights. There we go. And hit apply. Now all references should also be updated. As I said, always make sure to right click and rename to update all references. Now let's switch back to our flight controller because we got some errors here that we need to take care of again. So also here, add a using directive flights.data. Inside there we got the entities class. So let's implement it. Entities. There you go. Dot flights. And now let's scroll down. I will copy it here. And also paste it everywhere where it's referenced and showing that error. There we go. Awesome. Now next up we will test our application. So I will start it right now. And while it's running, I can already tell that the next part in the next video, what we're doing is really interesting because we will create a service from our new created entity class. And that's something you really want to use very often in ASP.NET Core, right? How you can create services and inject them in other classes by using the dependency injection. So after the testing, we will take a look at a very, very cool topic. All right, now let's start booking a flight. So first of all, let me search for a flight. And we got 2 remaining seats here. So let me book, let me register, jl@dev.com for example. However, I want to mention that later on in that challenge here, we will now fix that step. So when you click on login, you get redirected, right? But you already clicked on a flight. So we will fix this, but it's at the very end of this challenge. Now let's click on search again, click on book. Let's book 5 seats. We should not be able to do that. Awesome. Let's book 2 seats. My booking works. Awesome. And if you take a look at the console, you should see some errors from that booking 5 passengers with that conflict. Awesome. And then we booked 2 passengers. So everything from logging in to booking a flight worked fine. Great. Now let's switch to the new exciting topic about creating services and injecting them in ASP.NET Core.